A dinner tray moves down the aisle of a wide-body aircraft cruising at 35,000 feet. It passes row after row of passengers, past the curtain, past the galley, all the way to the front. A flight attendant knocks twice on the reinforced cockpit door. The tray goes in. Then, a few minutes later, a second tray follows. Different contents, different protein, different source. And here is the thing most people never think about. That is not a preference. On virtually every commercial flight carrying passengers today, the captain and first officer are required to eat different meals. Not suggested. Required: 200 people, 1 aircraft, no qualified backup. And the rule that protects all of it is about food. The immediate assumption is that pilots eat whatever the airline loads onto the aircraft. Same catering, same menu, same options as everyone else. Maybe they get a slightly better version. Maybe they eat first, but fundamentally the same food. That assumption is wrong, and the reason it is wrong is not about nutrition or allergies or preference. It is about one specific failure mode that aviation spent decades trying to engineer out of existence: simultaneous incapacitation. Both pilots, same time, same cause, and the cause is a shared meal. Food poisoning does not announce itself before it acts. A contaminated protein, undercooked chicken, improperly handled seafood, a batch stored at the wrong temperature can produce the first symptoms within 30 to 60 minutes of ingestion. Nausea, vomiting, dizziness, loss of fine motor control. These are not conditions compatible with flying an aircraft. But one sick pilot is a manageable problem. Aviation has built-in responses for that: a diversion, a declaration, a handoff. The system plans for individual failure. What it cannot absorb is simultaneous failure. 2 pilots, same meal, same contaminant, same window. That is not a single point of failure. That is the elimination of redundancy entirely. Here is the counterintuitive part. The more experienced and capable the crew, the worse this problem becomes. That seems backward. It is not. A highly trained, experienced flight crew is not backed up by a third qualified pilot sitting in the cabin, ready to step in. On most commercial routes, 2 pilots is the full complement. That is the entire human redundancy system. The 2-pilot cockpit was designed so that if one is incapacitated, the other can fly the aircraft safely. The whole architecture assumes the 2 failures do not happen at the same time. The meal rule exists specifically to protect that assumption. If both pilots eat the fish, and the fish is bad, the architecture fails. Not partially, completely. So, airlines do not leave this to preference or chance. Crew meal programs on most major carriers are engineered around the separation principle. The proteins must differ. If the captain selects the salmon, the first officer cannot have salmon. Not a different preparation of the same fish, a different protein entirely. The meals are sourced separately, prepared in separate batches, held under separate conditions. They arrive at the cockpit in clearly labeled, distinct containers, and the meals are not eaten at the same time. There is a deliberate stagger. One pilot eats while the other maintains control, and the timing is managed so the incapacitation windows, if either meal were contaminated, would not overlap. Both layers matter. Different food eliminates the common source. Staggered timing eliminates the common window. Most passengers have seen this and registered nothing. A flight attendant steps into the cockpit with 2 trays. The trays look different. One pilot is already eating, the other waits. If the contents are described at all, they are different dishes. It reads like preference. It is not preference. It is an engineered safety layer operating in plain sight, mistaken for catering service. Here is the behavioral paradox at the center of this. The most dangerous phase of foodborne illness is not when the symptoms appear, it is the window before they do. The asymptomatic phase. A pilot who has ingested a contaminated meal may feel completely normal for 30 or 40 minutes. Functioning, alert, flying the aircraft, and then, without warning, not. The meal separation rule does not wait for symptoms. It cannot. By the time symptoms appear, the window for prevention is already closed. So the rule operates entirely before any sign of danger exists. It does something that produces no visible effect when it works. No alarm sounds, no light comes on, no system activates. 2 different trays arrive at the cockpit. One pilot waits to eat, and nothing happens. That is the rule working perfectly. Its entire value is the absence of an event. The documented cases that built this practice are not hypothetical. There are incidents in aviation safety databases, and one frequently cited category involves crew members becoming ill mid-flight from contaminated food, requiring unplanned diversions, reduced crew operations, or, in at least one case, assistance from a deadheading pilot who happened to be aboard. The 1982 incident involving Alaska Airlines, in which multiple crew members became ill from food poisoning, became a reference point in aviation safety discussions about crew meal protocols. These events did not stay in news cycles. They went into operating manuals. They became policy. The rule exists because at some point, someone had to fly an aircraft while fighting their own body because the person next to them was already unable to help. The rule exists so that moment does not repeat. There are complications in the real world. Long-haul flights with augmented crews, 3 or 4 pilots rotating through rest cycles, add coordination complexity to the meal separation protocol. The staggering of rest already partially stagers the meal windows, which helps, but it does not eliminate the requirement for protein separation. The harder gap is on the ground. Layover meals at hotels are not governed by the same catering controls. Pilots eating at a restaurant. 12 hours before a flight are operating outside the engineered system. Most carriers address this through crew briefing culture, eat carefully, eat differently, know the risk window, but there is no caterer labeling a hotel dinner tray. Enforcement becomes judgment. And on lower-cost carriers with thinner catering infrastructure, the formal separation protocol may exist on paper more solidly than in practice. The principle is consistent. The implementation is not always uniform. That gap is worth sitting with. One of the most quietly critical safety protocols in commercial aviation is also one of the least formally codified at the regulatory level. The FAA does not have a single statute that reads, "Pilots must eat different meals." What exists are airworthiness regulations, airline operating manuals, and crew resource management standards that together create effective mandatory separation. It is a rule that lives in contracts, customs, and culture as much as in written law. The people responsible for 200 lives operate under a food requirement that has no dedicated placard, no dedicated checklist item, no flashing light for compliance. Just 2 different trays arriving at different times in a cockpit that almost no passenger ever sees. That tray moving toward the front of the aircraft, the one that seemed like a routine catering run, is doing something invisible and load-bearing. The entire redundancy architecture of a 2-pilot cockpit, billions of dollars of engineering, years of training, everything aviation has built to ensure that one failure never means total failure. All of it rests, in part, on the assumption that the 2 pilots did not eat the same thing. The meal rule is not a food preference. It is the protection layer for the protection system. It is the rule that keeps the backup from failing at the same moment as the primary. And the meal rule is not the only one like this. There are other invisible protocols woven into how pilots operate that exist for exactly the same reason, to prevent the moment where every redundancy fails simultaneously. Some of them involve the cockpit door, some involve the supplemental oxygen system, and one of them involves what happens to decision-making at altitude itself, and why the aircraft's pressurization system is, in a specific and documented way, one of the most subtle safety risks the crew faces on every flight.